there. Hello, folks. Thank you for joining us for the Backstage Community Sessions for Adopters. It's April 20th, 2022. We're in a new spot here. How do you like it? It's a bit different. We're trying out new things, but it's the same community meetup for the same community product, the open source project Backstage. Thank you for joining us. So we have a lot to cover today. First, we will go over some project news. Then we will have the maintainer update. We get a presentation by Hosseini from Infocast.io. Otto's here to demo the Addon framework. And Taurus is here to share something about use cases for Backstage. They found out some interesting things there. So I'm looking forward to that as well. But first, let's start with the community and project news. So first of all, there's a new community hub. If you go to backstage.io/community, then you will find it. It's created to make it easier to discover what's happening. It has a video section, and you will find all past recordings there. You're also invited to upload your meetup videos there as well. And let's try and make it like a beautiful video archive for the rainy days, or if people just want to learn new stuff and what's hip and happening in our community. If you want to add something, you have an initiative and you want to have it listed, you can just do a pull request, use an issue, or just reach out one of us. And I'm pretty sure that somebody will be willing to help you with that. Yeah, the other one is the Adopters Meetup, but yeah, you already noticed we moved it to the website on backstage.io/live. The idea is to make it a bit more easy to find, a bit more easy to join. We're streaming it live to YouTube and also on LinkedIn. And that will probably invite new people to join our meetup and no more things to do with Zoom and finding a code or clicking, installing updates, that sort of stuff. We're just here in your browser, just like Backstage. We do not want to lose the interactivity, so please use the chat, say hi, ask your questions, plug your things that are happening, as long as they are Backstage related, of course. But please, without your interactions, it will be so boring to have this session. So make it your new community meetup home. For the contributor session, nothing will basically change. Those will stay on Zoom because those are sessions where we, of course, have some interesting discussions together, and then it's always good to see each other's friendly faces. Cool. Then there's the community spotlight. If you want to highlight a community member for their efforts regarding the Backstage project, you can nominate them or yourself to be in the spotlight. There's a nomination form at backstage.io/nominate, and next week we will announce another contributor spotlight. So if somebody did something valuable for the project, please, nominate them. It's a small thing to do, but it's like a big gesture. Also up next, like in 2 weeks or something like that, it will be KubeCon EU, and we will be there. So if you're heading out there, be sure to visit us. We are in the project space, booth number 2, and we will have some swag. So if you want to have some limited edition Backstage swag and you are attending KubeCon in Valencia, then find us there. There will be some folks from the Backstage team, and you can meet us. And otherwise, if you're not there, send them over to us. If you're attending virtually, there's also some good news there, because we have a talk in the maintainer track by Dave Solo And if you are at KubeCon, of course, come to the session, please, because otherwise the room will be so empty, right? So we look forward to seeing you there, either in person or virtually. Next up is Ben, who's going to share the maintainer updates. Ben, hello.
Hello, I am Ben, and I'm here to share a maintainer update. I am probably going to keep this kind of light because we have got quite a lot of stuff to cover today. Yeah, where to start? So yesterday went out the 1.1 release. Some probably high-level stuff to cover here. We have bumped Jest to version 27 for the CLI, so the test now will run on Jest 27. There is some breaking changes with that that they've made, and probably mentioned the auth backend as well. We've changed out some things there, so we've removed the default sign-in resolvers, so you now have to provide your own or pick one of the predefined ones that we've also built. And they also now always have to return a token as well. Some other things maybe to mention, kind of what we're working on right now is simplifying onboarding of Backstage. So what we mean by that is to basically get Backstage up and running, get it pulling in data from GitHub, add in sign-in, deploying in production, for instance. We've kind of gone through and realized that there's a lot of steps to do there to try and get something up and running. And we want to simplify that. So we basically are trying to work out how we can make things easier and simpler for people to get up and running. And another area that we're looking at is kind of the backend system is what we're calling it, or basically how backend plugins are set up inside of Backstage in the backend. It's a little tricky right now with breaking changes. They kind of seem to affect quite a lot of things for end users, and we want to make this API a little bit more evolvable over time. So when we make changes, that there's not going to break everybody's setup. Basically, it's only going to break people's setup that are actually using those interfaces that have been removed, for instance. Yeah, I think that's probably kind of it. Short and sweet little update.
Thank you. And if you have questions for Ben or the maintainer team in general, please throw them in the chat. Ben will stick around for the rest of the session, of course. Right?
Yeah, of course.
Thank you. So next up, we have Ali here from infracost.io. Hello, Ali.
Hi, Sam.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. If it's okay, I was going to give a quick demo of Infracost. That's probably the easiest way to explain what Infracost does. And this is all we don't have a paid product. This is all of our open source free stuff. So I'm not here to sell anything really.
Cool.
Is it okay if I share my screen?
Let me check. Yeah, you can share your screen, but I don't see it.
I quit Chrome 5 times to get this set up. So hopefully.
We all feel your pain. We all feel your pain. I see your screen.
Awesome. All right. Okay.
But it's probably the one where you see me on. So
I'm going to do this.
Want to switch around things.
Does it work okay now? Can you see my terminal?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Hi everyone. I'm Ali, one of the co-founders of Infracost, and Infracost is, like I mentioned, an open source project that enables anyone, DevOps, SRE engineers, to see cost estimates for infrastructure as code. So it's a CLI tool, and there's 2 main pieces to it. There is the CLI that I'll show you in a second, and that hits up open source, again, cloud pricing API. This has about more than 3 million prices from AWS, Azure, and Google. So it's a GraphQL API we've built that digests all those public price books, and you can query it very easily yourself, but it's also what the CLI uses. So the main aim is to show cost estimates very quickly. And I have an example Terraform project here. So you can see this Terraform project is launching instance, and then there's a Lambda function here. I'll talk about those in a second. And just given that, I can run Infracost and just point it to that project. And I now get a cost estimate. So this is telling me my instance is going to cost about more than $500, and it will show me how much my IOPS could cost. So you get the idea for those kind of resources. And for things like Lambda or S3 or Azure Functions, where the usage depends on, the cost depends on usage, we like to explain the pricing, the applicable prices very quickly and easily to engineers. What they can then do is add some assumption. Hey, what if I have 20 million invocations on Lambda? How much would that cost? What if the average response time is this? And then you can get the cost estimate again using those inputs. So one other interesting thing is this can also be generated from CloudWatch. So that's like the CLI mode. What we see a lot is people then add that to CI/CD using our GitHub integrations or any other CI/CD integration that we support. We support a bunch of them. And here, instead of showing a breakdown, we switch into diff mode because it's all about a change I'm making and the cost impact of that change. So you can see this pull request is going to increase the cost by over $1,000. You can see the diff view. So in the same way that tools like Terraform show you a diff of the infrastructure that's about to be changed, InfraCost shows the cost diff. And the aim is, at the moment, we discuss security issues or performance issues in pull requests, and why not costs? That's the thing we're trying to change with InfraCost. So a few months ago, some of our users who are also using Backstage, or most of our users are DevOps and SRE, so they probably deploy Backstage instead of use it directly themselves. They asked us what could Backstage plugin look like for InfraCost. At the moment, we don't have a dashboard. It's just a lot of pull request comments. And this is the thing I wanted to ask with the community is, when we talk to FinOps communities, we get the sense that they say that developers don't care about cloud costs, but we think the issue is developers don't know much about cloud costs. So that's what we're trying to change. And then maybe the two questions I have are, is anyone using the Cost Insights plugin? If so, what value do you get from it? And does it help to see things like the most expensive pull requests or which one saved us money, and those kind of things in Backstage 2 or not? So I want to stop sharing my screen. There's an issue that we can discuss continuing going forward. Thanks.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I've pasted the link to the issue in the chat. So please go there to leave your comments here and share your experiences. Why are you using Cost Insights? What do you get out of it? And I think it's interesting to check out infracost.io. Like you mentioned, a lot of people focus on indeed security issues and on testing. But it's amazing to see, like, hey, this pull request will cost you this amount of money. That's cool. How do you actually do that?
A lot of complicated parsing at the moment with the Terraform code. So there's two main methods. One is we look at the plan JSON and parse out all the parameters that might have a cost. We have a community of more than 50 contributors who are one by one mapping like the Lambda prices to the Lambda code, the EC2. It is a lot of work, but the community is helping. So there's no magic. It's just a lot of manual work. And then the cool thing is once a mapping is worked out, anybody can just get a cost estimate for that resource.
I mentioned that at some point you could also like predict what a certain piece of code might cost in your service.
That would be next level where we could. I think the future is going to be more serverless costs. So there, the issues become more interesting. But we are looking at things like Pulumi integration too. And over there, you're writing Golang or TypeScript that launches S3 buckets. So it would be awesome if we can do the same.
Yeah, well, who knows in the future. But it is an open source project, right?
Yes, it's open source, both the CLI pieces and the cloud pricing API. I started looking at cloud costs about 10 years ago as part of my PhD, and I've had this unhealthy obsession with it since then. I don't know why I'm still building tools. We do have plans to make a paid product later on, but at the moment we're squarely focused on the free and open source version.
Cool. Well, there's some community comments. Let me see. Marcos asks, Ali, when you run this estimation, where do you set the default usage? For instance, for a customers DB, the estimation based on the RUs.
Anything we can detect from the Terraform code, we detect that and use that. Anything that is usage-based, the users can define in a YAML file that can also be passed into InfoCost.
I'm so happy to hear that there's still YAML. Good. Let me see. Mandy has a remark. We know that chargebacks and showbacks are definitely needed at the application operator platform, operator level. It's interesting.
Yeah, I think most of this is actually the second cloud cost product I've worked on. The first one, we squarely focused on engineering management and finance, where the use case was showback and chargeback there. Now we think we need to do a better job at the engineer level. Like, it's too late when the bill comes. We already have to pay AWS.
Yeah, well, indeed. And there's like tons of sessions always at conferences, how to tame your cloud bill and that sort of things.
Yes. So we're not trying to replace any of those showback and chargeback mechanisms. Those are amazing and are definitely needed. We just think when I'm writing code and sending a pull request, I don't care if I'm buying a t-shirt or an EC2 instance. I should know how much that thing costs. That's how I can make a better decision.
Yeah. That's really, really interesting because as developer, you do not want to bother, especially cloud stuff. You do not want to bother with what kind of infrastructure are you using. Maybe you won't even know what's the infrastructure exactly. So it's good to have these insights. So thank you so much for joining, Ali. Once again, go check out the issue, leave your feedback, and otherwise, maybe we can have some discussion on Discord. If you're there, Ali, maybe share your...
I'll join Discord.
Great. Well, let us know in the chat what's your name, and people will be able to also maybe have a discussion around InfoCost as well. Great. Thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Okay, next up, we have Otto, and Otto is here to share something. I heard even a demo about the Addon framework. Otto, what is the Addon framework? Tell me.
Hey everyone, so the Techdocs add-on framework is, how the name says, an add-on to Techdocs. I will just quickly share some slides that will accompany me. It's not really a live demo, it's more like a demo as a presentation. I'll share my screen. Okay, if anyone is not seeing the full screen presentation, let me know. Does it work?
It's there. It's there.
Perfect.
Okay.
So maybe just a very few quick words about me and our team. So I'm part of a publication team in Backstage based in Stockholm, and our team focuses mostly on Techdocs and search of Backstage, both internally and externally. And yeah, Techdocs add-ons, what you asked. The idea is that we have Techdocs as a product in Backstage to make any code near your components, create a site out of it with very little friction. And today it looks somewhat like this. So you have a documentation site, which is markdown content, which features some additional things like images. And on top of the text content, we have some Chrome around it, like some navigation on the left and table contents on the right. However, this as a product itself is very convenient. You can easily create a site, spin up, add more content, edit, review, and so on. But at some point, you might want to extend the functionality. So let's say you want to have embedded things in your documentation site, or you want to have You want to have that kind of a feedback loop. You want to encourage developers to keep the documentation up to date, because just creating documentation once will not really stay up to date in the upcoming weeks or months, depending on how fast you change your services. So we thought, okay, first thinking about the product itself, what are the places where we can add new components on the front end side? So we came up with like some concept. We tried out what we have internally. We made them examples and divided into different so-called locations for add-ons, meaning that we have the add-on Techdocs experience itself, and we can place single add-ons in one of those locations. Let's say on the top right in the header, it would be very convenient to just put there, it was last updated at this and this time. Or we want to have, I don't know, something embedded inside the content. Or we want to have more settings or anything on the same row as the search bar. So these are the locations we have as of now. There was a RFC posted a while ago, and we actually added the release to as an alpha release, I think yesterday or this week. So it's actually possible to try it out. I will post the link later. And yeah, so much about the theory of it. Now, taking a step back, we were thinking, this sounds very, I mean, this is more conceptual, but still, who are the people involved in this? Because there's different angles to take from documentation. It's not just documentation, that's it, but also everyone has a different relation to it. So first of all, we have, of course, the documentation writers and readers. So maybe if you read the documentation, you might want to have the option to, I don't know, increase the text size, or you might want to have any additions that can make the reading experience better. Or you have the Backstage adopters. So if you own a Backstage instance, you might want to find a way to create the feedback loop to improve the quality of the documentation at the whole company. And of course, as a Techdocs developer, let's say you contribute to Techdocs as a product, and there is many possibilities to extend it. We want to give you a framework, a structure where you can simply hook into existing concepts and quickly, easily create a single package which contains one add-on that can be distributed and shared with others. That's the goals, basically, from the framework. This is what we have so far. This is like a small code example, not really too much in detail, on a high level how it works. So first, one would create a component, a simple rect component on the front end. It can take some props and otherwise works like every other component you would have a Backstage. And by itself, it doesn't do much. So the second thing is to configure it. So you would provide it with a add-on extension. You would specify on which location it's supposed to show up, and you would point to the component you just defined. Still then, it is configured, but it is not active yet, because we want to have more granular option when to show it and in which order to show it. Maybe we have two add-ons in the sidebar, which one is going to show first. So to activate it, it will be put into the routes of the Techdocs route entry. And I mean, it will be documented and the RC will be updated. That's something we're working on right now. It's still in the alpha flag, so it's not, let's say, in serial production in that sense. But once we have the documentation updated, we have a blog post featuring how it works, what we can do, and also some example add-ons that can then be used. And as for the timeline, so this whole add-on framework idea has been going on since, I think, almost half a year now, because we noticed internally in our Backstage instance in Spotify, we noticed that we do have some extension to Techdocs, and we noticed that it's kind of hard to keep Techdocs as a product clean and stable at the same time extending what we want to offer. So we started an initiative to just write down and capture, okay, what's the common pattern and what are use cases we can work on. Then we started to wrap up, package smaller add-ons into smaller packages and create a framework around it and stabilize them so we could use them internally. Then we thought more long-term, okay, if we release this on a broader sense, what are the important cornerstones of the framework to have this as a long-lasting architecture. And we then released that as an RFC in February. And this idea of the RFC is now behind an alpha flag available. That's pretty much the timeline. And the blog post publicly announcing this will be coming soon as well. That's pretty much it. If there are any questions in the chat, I can maybe go into them.
Thank you, Otto. That looks really exciting. Yeah, you told me, like, you told a bit about the use cases. What are some more use cases you're thinking about when you look at the Techdocs?
So one common pattern we see is that contributors want to have the possibility to embed external content, let it be some diagrams, interactive things, or just links typed on an iframe. And to keep Backstage secure in a way, we would not allow arbitrary JavaScript, but we would say, okay, there's a possibility to create an add-on that explicitly handles what you want to import and show as just a little add-in into the content. I think that's probably one of the most common use cases we will see.
Cool. There's a question or more of a remark maybe from Theophile. Techdocs are fantastic, but is Backstage well suited for a public catalog of API? I feel like it's exposing quite a lot of details that might not be always suited for public exposure.
So I'm not entirely sure if that goes now into the API of Techdocs add-ons. But in general, what we are trying to do is to keep Techdocs as a separate, addition to your existing services. So if you want to have your service run in a certain way, that's fine. And Techdocs will be a dedicated site. And there we will step by step stabilize the API and say, okay, look, this is the add-on framework. You can use this API, and this will be supported in the long run as well.
Cool. Sounds promising. And Frederick also answered in the chat a bit about if you would want to put Backstage public. The answer is, well, it's not built for that. So maybe you might not want to do that. But you could, but maybe not. Cool. Thank you so much, Otto. You'll probably hang out here a little while. So if you have some questions about Techdocs, I know that Gary's there too. So you folks will be probably happy to answer questions. Oh, there's one burning question probably. Can you tell a bit more about the first Techdocs add-on? That's a good question.
Yes, indeed. So we wanted to kickstart the Techdocs add-on framework with one example add-on, and it will be a report issue add-on. There's a pull request currently ongoing, which means that you could select some text in documentation and immediately create a new issue in your source control management. So the idea is to really speed up the feedback loop. You just read something, oh, this is wrong, select, create a new issue, and you can just keep on going and not having Techdocs. So that's the first one I want to feature.
Cool, nice feature, nice feature. And I'm pretty sure that there will be many more following. I know there's quite a list of, quite a wish list of add-ons. So I'm really, really looking forward to what's happening in this space. So thank you so much, Otto, for joining us. And Marco, thank you for your question. So the next topic on the agenda is, well, we're going to talk space. Well, not that space what you're thinking of, probably. Not the rocket thing, right, Taras?
Yep, we will talk space. Definitely space. Can you see my presentation?
I can open it for you. There you go.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So what I want to talk about today is what happens when someone starts a Backstage project. A lot of companies are installing their Backstage. They're getting it deployed, and now they have, their Backstage instance, and now they're looking at these, feature sets. So we have these kind of 5 major pieces or core features of Backstage. So there's, the service catalog, the software catalog, the software templates, Techdocs, we have the Kubernetes plugin, and there's also search functionality. And there's a whole bunch of plugins that they can install in addition to what comes with Backstage. But what can be really unclear for people is, where should you start? Like, what is the first thing that you should be integrating? Because getting started can take a little bit of time. So the thing that you're going to configure first and you're going to release to the users, is that really the thing that you should be starting with? Is it going to get you the kind of traction that teams are looking for? Because because we're doing this because we want to improve developer experience. So how do we choose which feature we should start with? We know that Spotify, for example, started with ownership. So being able to show who owns a specific component in the catalog. But we also know that each company is different, and no two companies are alike. And so they might be using similar tools, but the developer experience at each company is going to be different based on like what with the history of how these tools are deployed and how they're configured. So how does one choose what is the first thing they should be integrating? So what we recommend is to start with by asking your developers what is most important for them. I'm Taras Mankovski. I'm the CEO of Frontside. We are a Backstage and DX consulting company. What I want to tell you about today is the process that we followed to answer this question of like what should a company start with. We had one of our clients ask us this question, and what we did was work with them to create a roadmap by interviewing their developers. And so the process of creating the roadmap followed something like this, and it took a little bit of it was a little bit of a journey. So I want to kind of share with you the journey that we went through, and share with you some of the use cases that we discovered in the process. But this was kind of the general flow. So we started off with kind of defining the personas that we wanted to interview. Then we selected the users who we're going to be interviewing, and then we conducted the interviews, and then we tagged the resulting data that we got from the interviews, and then we summarized. So when we started to define the personas, it was pretty easy because we know that we essentially wanted to talk to developers and SREs and test engineers. Those were the kind of the most obvious folks to talk to. And we had the company conducted a survey previously, so they had a list of people who were interested in providing feedback. So from that list, we selected people who were recent hires. So in each of the personas, we selected recent hires, and we selected long-term employees, because they have a different perspective. Recent hires will tell you what it's like to onboard, but they're not going to know things like what is it like to, and they're going to know the experience of like finding things for the first time within the company. But long-term employees will tell you more about like how things are, and they already know where everything is. So for them, they'll have a different perspective. So from the survey results, we kind of looked at that list. We selected the people, and we were looking for folks who had interesting things to say, like interesting feedback to say, like something a little bit more than just results that just answered the survey, but actually had some interesting commentary. And then when we started to think about like what questions we want to ask, this is where it got really interesting, because we knew that we wanted to ask questions that were not leading. We want to make the questions open-ended so that people could give us the information that we need, and they could kind of talk about things that are concerns to them. But it was really unclear, like, what are the questions that we really should be asking. So we started to do some lit review, and so we tried to look through blog posts and publications to find something that could give us some insight into like what would be really good questions for us to ask. And we came across this publication by a group of researchers led by a researcher from GitHub, and researchers from University of Victoria and Microsoft, and they published this paper called "The Space of Developer Productivity," and there's more to it than you think. And the main kind of premise of the publication is that productivity, like developer productivity, is not something that could be reduced to a single dimension. So it's not something it's not a single value that you can measure that is going to give you a good picture of developer experience. It's a multidimensional thing, and they talk about the 5 dimensions, and these 5 dimensions are described by the SPACE acronym. So I really recommend for anyone who is doing the work, like who's doing the work of improving developer experience, to read this, because it's it gives you a really good overview of the kind of considerations you need to think about. And so I'll describe the kind of these 5 dimensions. So the 5 dimensions that they talk about is, the first one is satisfaction and well-being. So that's the S. So satisfaction and well-being is like the degree of satisfaction amongst employees, and whether they would recommend their team to others. Developer efficacy is whether developers have the tools and resources they need to do their work. And burnout, which is exhaustion caused by excessive or prolonged workspace stress. So this is one of the dimensions of developer productivity that they identified in their research. The next is performance. So it's the quality of the software that is created. Is it reliable? Does it have bugs? And is it like a healthy product that users enjoy using? And is it something that customers actually want to start using and continue to use for a long time? Does it have the features they're looking for? So this is something that we've like Frontside has observed in our work as well. It's something that we've called like a developer shipping it. Are they actually able to produce good quality software and that users want to use? And it was really interesting to see it being identified as one of the dimensions in this SPACE framework. The next is activities. So activities is the actual work that goes into doing like shipping software. So one of the ways that you can measure this would be by measuring the volume account of design documents and specifications and like work items like tasks and pull requests and commits. So it's all of the kind of artifacts that are created in the process of creating software. And the another kind of measure that could be used is around continuous integration and deployment. So like how many builds are created, how many tests are run, how many deployment releases are created, and how the infrastructure is utilized. I think the considerations around cost, infrastructure cost would be one of those things. And operational activities are things like how many incidents and issues were reported, and distribution of severity of those issues, and how many people had to participate in on-call activities like around debugging and incident mitigation. So these are this is the aspect of like activities that the developers need to take. And the next one is communication and collaboration. These are the dimension that deals with people interacting with other people within the organization. So a lot of this is like being able to find the information that you need and be able to find expertise within the organization. How quickly a contribution that you make is integrated into the project. Is the kind of feedback that you're getting from your team in your pull requests, relationships that you have to other teams, like how are you connected to other teams, and who is like what the actual kind of quality of the network relationships that you have to other within the organization, and this onboarding time and experience for new members. So these are, this is communication. So the last one is efficiency and flow. This is something that, you know, we've also, for like front side is also we talk about a lot, which is kind of this idea that we want to have developers feel like they're flying, and it was really interesting to see it, you know, being represented. Apparently, this was a really big part of the actual feedback that we're getting from developers in the process of doing this research, is that developers are looking for this feeling like they're in a flow and they're doing their work. And so one of the ways of measuring this flow is like the number of kind of handoffs, the number of interruptions and the total time that it takes to go from one stage of development to another. So these are the 5 dimensions. And so what, you know, when we went through this review, we initially thought that, oh, I'm looking, yeah, so this was the efficiency and flow slide. Sorry, I was one slide behind. So we started with these 5 stages. I mean, with these 5 dimensions as a starting point, and so we thought, okay, so let's ask 2 questions per dimension, and then let's do a trial run and interview developers using this questions that we devised based on these 5 dimensions suggested in Space Framework. And so what we did was we went through and we essentially interviewed developers. We used this tool called Dovetail app, and I really recommend this app because it's very handy. You know, once you conduct your interviews and you ask your questions, what you can do is essentially upload your recordings to this Dovetail app, and what it does, it will transcribe the audio for you, and then you can use it to tag the transcript. And so what we did was we used the dimensions of that described in the Space Framework to tag the transcripts. And so we wanted to do a preliminary review before we start doing, like, before we expand the actual interview process to a broader group. We wanted to make sure that the results that we're getting using the questions that we were asking was actually giving us results, because what we're really looking for is, you know, what are the features that we want to build in Backstage, right? So you know, we wanted to make sure that the questions that we are asking are going to give us information about that would help us figure out what features we need to build. So what we did was we took the transcripts, and I blurred out the actual content of this because some of the stuff is like, it's confidential for a particular customer. But what we did was, so you could see on the right side of the slide is they have these tags. So these are tags that we tagged based on a conversation. Like every time that a developer mentioned something that we could connect to a dimension in a Space Framework, we tagged that with that specific dimension, and this was really helpful because we could use it to we could use the different qualities of each dimension to kind of identify specific things that developers were concerned about. But what was really interesting is that once we've gone through this process, what we found was that it was really difficult to see how this mapping by itself would give us features that we need to implement in Backstage. It wasn't what we found was that we could spend months going through this process of reviewing all the data using the Space Framework to figure out, like, to tag everything. I think we would get really broad information that we could use to really kind of optimize at the organization level, like, you know, identify improvements that could be made at the engineering organization level. But the challenge is that that process would take a really long time, because the 5 dimensions that are described in Space Framework, they're really helpful for understanding how to think about the information and how to process the information, and it provides like a really broad perspective on the data that we're getting. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't create a direct connection to what we need to build in Backstage. So that was a little bit discouraging at first, but then as we were processing the information, what we found was there were certain areas that there's certain things the developers said that we tagged with features that kind of resembled things that you would see in Backstage. So like there were things that we could, it was somewhat accidental that we were tagging things that we knew Backstage had. So for example, like, we found we had a lot of these tags where developers complained about documentation, the quality of documentation. And everywhere where we saw this overlap between a feature in Backstage, like something that Backstage can improve, and one of the dimensions of Backstage framework, of space framework, we found that when we look at those, we looked at those two tags, we can actually see how we could improve the specific, improve the circumstances for the person using Backstage. And so that was really kind of unexpected, but this is really what we were looking for. We want to find a way to be able to create this roadmap. So this was kind of a very happy accident that this happened naturally. And so when we thought about this further, what we did was we created kind of a matrix. And we mapped, essentially, we took the 5 features that, kind of 5 categories of features of Backstage. So discoverability, documentation, searchability, scaffolding, and platform integration. And we essentially kind of mapped it as a matrix to the 5 dimensions of the space framework. And what was really interesting is that we could take each of the dimensions, and we could say, like, what is, so like by looking at it this way, we could say, like, we could answer a question like what is the area of developer experience that we can improve with Backstage that impacts employee satisfaction. So in other words, we could impact a dimension of developer experience with Backstage by thinking about, by focusing on the things that Backstage could solve. And this was really, really helpful for us, because what it allows us to do is really focus our questions. So instead of having broad questions that kind of covered everything, we could say, okay, since we are right now, the most important thing that we could focus on right now is employee satisfaction, is the one that fits kind of within our mandate, because the other aspects they would require a kind of additional work that we didn't have time for. We needed to really zero in on actionable data. So we took employee satisfaction as a primary dimension, and then we said, okay, let's ask questions specifically focusing on employee satisfaction, and let's create questions that are going to give us information that we're looking for. Like, not, we don't want to guide people to give us specific information, but what we wanted to do is kind of focus the questions on things that could be actionable for us in Backstage, and with the expectation that in the future, like, we could have follow-up conversations. Like, once the initial set of features is implemented, we could probably have follow-up conversations to figure out, how to address other dimensions. But focusing on one dimension allowed us to really, like, create very actionable questions. So, for example, for discoverability, what we asked was, if you needed a service, like, how would you go about finding one of these services within your company? For documentation, we asked, how would you go about finding out about how a system works within your company? For searchability, if you need to find a specific resource at your company, how would you go about finding that resource? For scaffolding, like, how would you go about creating something new? And for platform integration, how do you go about figuring out information about about a deployed service? So this is, like, really focused in terms of the area that we're asking about. But what it did was it allowed us to, by asking these questions, it allowed us to get feedback that we could reason about and easily express as features in Backstage. And so what we got, so we went and we asked 17 we conducted 17 interviews, and we asked these 5 questions, and what we found was that the conversation was very open. Like developers were and SREs and testers were very open to kind of share their information about this topic, and then they kind of like the conversation kind of flowed, and then they were able to give us more information that they thought was appropriate. And then what we did was we then used the same process of tagging each of the transcripts, and we were able to tag the most, like what we found was that it was really obvious what was most frustrating for developers. So it was really clear that documentation was a very kind of frustrating topic, and it made it really clear that for us, because of how many people talked about documentation and how many people complained about documentation, it was really clear that this is an area that we needed to focus on. And I think what's really interesting about these results is that in the same way that you can't really, like the space framework suggests that you should not be looking at a single dimension or a single measure when measuring, or you shouldn't be looking at a single measure when thinking about measuring productivity. In the same way, I think there isn't a single Backstage feature that solves all the problems or solves the problem completely. Like there's different features within Backstage that kind of work together, but what doing this process of interviewing, what it allowed us to do is it allowed us to make the circumstances, developers, and the features that we need to implement really personal to that particular company. And so what I'd like to do next is I want to share with you some of the use cases that we discovered, and it kind of suggests like how, because these are kind of user stories that that people in our interviews shared with us that were really impactful in helping us really kind of push us to find solutions to these problems. And I wanted to share these use cases because a lot of companies right now are asking, like, how do we solve these? What problems should we solving with Backstage? And I would like to get the ball rolling on sharing these use cases because they will be helpful for others when thinking about what kind of problems can be solved with Backstage. So one of the use cases, so I have 4 use cases. I will cover them quickly. One of the use cases is one developer said that he had a task that was estimated to take 4 weeks of development, but he knew, like instinctually, he knew that within the company this problem has been solved before. The problem is that it is so difficult to find information within the organization. Documentation is scattered through wikis. Wikis is not easy to search, and so it took him 4 weeks to prowl all the different resources, try to find all the nooks and crannies where the information could be and could be available, like where he could find the answer to, like, how do I solve this problem? Like, how can I use something that someone at the company already done to solve this problem? And after 4 weeks of research, he did find that resource. There was another team that created an API specifically for that. Once he found that API, it took him 4 hours to do the implementation. So he spent they estimated 4 weeks of development, but he spent four weeks doing research within the company to then do 4 hours of development. So if we can reduce that 4 weeks of development into something much shorter, the organization can benefit from having developers being able, using the internal tools and being able to ship faster using things that others already created. So this really kind of focused on improving the searchability of existing documentation and improving the quality of documentation. And this use case was this particular problem around documentation was reaffirmed by an SRE, because what the SRE shared is that quite often SREs need to jump into troubleshoot a problem, and they need to understand, or if they need to make a plan, they need to understand what they need to understand the service. They need to understand how what the they need system diagrams that represent the service accurately. But what often happens is that there are some teams that have really good documentation, and then they have really good system diagrams that they create and maintain. Then there are other teams that create system diagrams and they don't really update those diagrams, or they created them and they haven't really used them for a while, so they're really out of date. And then there's some that create diagrams that represent future state that was never achieved, and those diagrams were never updated. And so what happens is that when you encounter this enough, what you find is that you actually don't trust the documentation that is available, because it is too you have this kind of sense that the documentation is unreliable. So making the documentation feel reliable is one of the kind of objectives that we set ourselves when we start to build a roadmap for the project. Third use case was one of the developers said that he keeps a list of 170 links that are that he uses and he shares with others, because if you don't have these links, it's quite possible that you're going to approach a problem that you will not be able to solve, simply because you don't know what the resources or where the system is or how to access a specific system. You don't know. Basically, without a link, you can't do your work. And so he has this. He created this list of links that he keeps, maintains, and he shares it with other people who would then use it to find things within the company. So making it so that developers don't need to maintain a link to find all the things was something that we really prioritize in the particular roadmap. And lastly, one of the SREs suggested that one of the things that they need, when an SRE gets a PagerDuty notification, they need to jump up, look at the screen, and understand exactly what are the soft and hard dependencies of a particular service that's failing. So a soft dependency would be something that is a resource that's used by the service, and if that resource has changed for whatever way, that could be causing the problem. So these are the soft dependencies that the service uses. And hard dependencies would be other services that might be failing as a result of the service. So he needs to be able to jump up, look at the screen, and see exactly what those things are. And without that, it's really difficult for them to be able to troubleshoot the problems that they're dealing with, especially with the other documentation problems that I described earlier. So these 4 use cases were the use cases that we used as a starting point to build the roadmap, and that gave us a good 3 months worth of work that felt very actionable. So that's it. I'm Taras Mankovski. We love Backstage and we love DX at Frontside. I'm always happy to talk about any of these things. That's it.
Great, and people know where to find you probably. You are available on Discord and basically everywhere. There's Backstage, there's Taras. So rest assured that you can reach out to Taras. Thank you for this overview of space, and especially how you used it to gain valuable insights and map it to Backstage. That was basically one of my questions. Hey, but where do you even start with this thing? How to define these questions? Was that a hard process to get some sensible questions?
It was difficult at first, because it was difficult to especially because it was kind of difficult at first. But I think going through the process of kind of iterating on those questions helped a lot, and trying those questions out. I'm glad that we did it in 2 rounds. That really helped. So because the second round was much more effective.
And if you look at the questions, would it also be that, well, maybe this is a bit meta, but if you would ask engineers questions while they work in Backstage about their experience, would that somehow maybe also give insights?
Maybe. That's a good question. I don't know. I think there's a lot of information that can be gathered by observing the data that's in like working with the data in Backstage. I think that might be something like a lot of the metrics that exist. A lot of the metrics in the space framework, I think, can be devised from the data that we have in Backstage. Like how often did a pull request get updated, right? So if we have that information in Backstage, we could say like a typical pull request has a lifespan of, let's say, 2 weeks. Can we drive that down to 5 days? So that's something we could get from having that data in Backstage. But yeah, I don't know. I think we just don't have enough information yet. We need to try it and see what happens, and then we'll learn more. That's why I kind of wanted to get the ball rolling on talking about these use cases, so we could see how we could measure these kind of things.
Cool. Yeah, and there's more details in the issue. The link is in the chat. What I thought was like amazing when I learned of this well, kind of new thing, is if I compare it to existing methods like the developer velocity index, like that goes like businesses, and like it looks like broad at a lot of things like technology, but this goes like way deeper, because you can have like cool technology, but like by you leveraging this framework, you get real insights in what's happening and which knobs you might want to turn to not get stuck at some point. So that's really cool to see that.
I agree. It's the focus on shipping fast. It doesn't have the aspect of the dimension of quality, which is, are you shipping the right thing? And that's a really right. That's a really tricky one. So I think it's really important that they did this work and they give us the starting point when thinking about developer experience.
Cool. Now let's go over the comments. David says, I fell into the space framework from reading the Accelerate book. Okay, cool. That's a good book tip. David, please paste in the link. Then we can all probably enjoy the book. Lawrence says, looks promising. I totally agree. Mark says, at Pages GD, we focused on scaffolding first. Yeah, that, of course. Yeah, you have your unique company with your unique pain points. Better always start out where you can solve things which are stuck or broken. Space Framework gives you a good foundational mental model on how to think about developer productivity. Yeah, I think that. Yeah, that's also like basically the big takeaway from your presentation. Cool. Oh, and a reminder that the contributor session is next week on Zoom. This is maybe a hint for me that I should maybe wrap up. Thank you so much, Taras, for joining and sharing about this model. Please do reach out to Taras, and maybe let's continue the discussion on Discord. Thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you.
So yeah, this is it for this community session. A reminder that the contributor session is next week on Zoom. So if you would like to demo something cool, something you did recently, contributed something, or are working on something which you would like to share, you have burning questions, things you would like to discuss, like, I don't know, let's mention some things that we had discussions on the past few days, like upgrading. Like that's an interesting topic, I think, to talk about. I know that there will be a presentation by Taras about GraphQL. So that's already great stuff that we can discuss. But please, it's nothing without you. So add your thing to the issue. The link is in the chat. And if you can't click the link, or if you watch the recording, then please just go to GitHub and go to the Backstage project, and there's community and there's like issues, and you can just add things that you want to discuss. And we're friendly people. We just discuss everything you put in there. So there you go. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you liked the new experience. If not, also let us know. Just put your opinions in the chat. We hope to see you next week on Zoom for the contributors meeting. And please take care, and let's continue the discussion on Discord, Twitter, or wherever you are. You can find all the community channels on backstage.io/community. I'm going to do the awkward wave because, like, I'm alone. So, hey, bye.